So we're back with another Titans mini set card review, and we got Warrior and some freshly revealed Rogue cards today. And man, these Warrior cards in particular seem kind of crazy good. Let's kick it off here with a new legendary, for instance, General Vezax, a 7-mana 7/6 with Rush. Battlecry gain 4 armor. And then Death Rattle, lose 4 armor to resummon this. So basically here, as long as you have armor, enough armor to continually resummon Vezax, this becomes a sort of infinite onboard threat. He will just keep resummoning himself every time he dies, as long as you have that 4 armor to lose. Which of course can make him kind of like a board clear tyrant, or alternatively, depending on the game state, perhaps a just irremovable threat that just maybe whittles down your opponent. Kind of reminds you almost a little bit of like a Rattlegore of old. Like, this just won't go away because they have so much life already because they're Control Warrior. And that's really cool. So, you know, a couple use cases here. Like, number one, just play this on turn 7. Even if you have 0 armor, there is a pretty decent chance you might be able to like trade this in to clear or help you clear something, and then resummon it immediately because it gave you enough armor to at least get that first resummon, and then trade it in again. So, you know, you kind of go 1 for 2. Use 1 card to clear up a couple things. Maybe it's even left behind on board a little bit as a threat as well. So just straight up singular card, I'm gonna kill your stuff. Maybe it doesn't die. In some ways this could almost be a little bit better with less health. So for instance, if you traded it into a 5/5, you could resummon it. Right now there are some targets where this is going to survive the trade and you might feel a little bad, but hopefully in those cases you still have some armor behind. If you don't, though, of course the opponent can maybe just chip your health away with whatever didn't get cleaned up and then kill the Vezax, and it will die. I think the other game state for this is like you're ahead, you got 20 armor or whatever, you're feeling, you know, decent, and you just want to make sure you have ways to close out the game. This could become that Rattlegore-esque kind of threat on board where your opponent just can't get rid of this thing, and then you just hit them for 7 a few turns in a row probably, and you win the game. So really cool card in those regards. Now that said, I'm a little more hesitant on this card than most. I think our next 2 Warrior cards are totally insane. I think this one, I have some doubts. You know, Warrior just got a really good way to end games with Odin, and now they have this lethality when they gain armor. Is a card like General Vezax going to be as important for that kind of deck? Like, faster Warriors don't need this because they don't have enough armor. Slower Warriors now have Odin as a win condition tied into the same expansion cycle timeline as General Vezax. So does this feel a little bit unnecessary as a way to kind of end games in those sort of decks? I do worry that. I also worry that actually this is a bit of a liability sometimes once you play it out. Like, it's probably not, because it's just so overwhelming that it will kind of net you enough favor, even if the opponent kills a few of these to remove your big armor total. They've spent so many resources killing these that you kind of net out as an advantage. But there is that risk that if they like deal with this enough, it actually starts costing you life that you've built up, and then maybe you like get into an OTK range or something. Or there's some risk inherent to this actually eating your armor total away as it gets resummoned. So, I mean, does a faster deck actually need this? No. Does the slower deck have better ways maybe to just end games than a card like Vezax? I think so with Odin. This might still slip in there just to have another big awesome threat and big awesome card, so that if you don't get Odin, you might still have a win condition as a backup plan. So I'm not saying not a viable card. I think there are absolutely still worlds where this gets played in those control decks. I just don't know if it's like a standout. I don't know if it's the star. Might feel like it's near the bottom of the list. Might feel like something gets cut as more things come along. So not the best Warrior card in this package, but still pretty cool one. We're going to talk about some nutty cards here in a second, though, I think. Speaking of which, we've got Sanitize. This is a new 4-mana spell. It deals damage equal to your armor to all minions. And then if you forge it, you will gain 3 armor first. So you can kind of basically take a hero power, you know, by forging this and then using that armor gain later alongside your Sanitize to make sure that you have some nice board clear built into this. So 3 at that base if you forge it, and potentially, of course, way more. Now this does hit friendly minions, just keep that in mind, but ultimately this is kind of like a super Reckless Flurry. If you guys remember Reckless Flurry, the difference is Reckless Flurry would eat armor. You would lose armor, and it was still good because you just sometimes desperately needed, you know, a board clear. This does not spin the armor. You still get to keep it. And as we know, Warrior has tons of ways to gain armor really cheaply. So whether they've kind of stored it up from previous turns, and this is just that nice outlet to clear the board in the mid game, or if they have to do it all at once, we know Odin, it makes decks want to do that anyway. Running a bunch of armor cards just got another great reason to do it. Before you had an Odin payoff, that was awesome. I want to kill you once I get all my armor cards going. Now you've also got reasons to use those armor cards along the way to Odin, which is to set up this really awesome, efficient board clear and help you stabilize. So Warrior actually has felt a little bit light on good, just like board clear that works. Even Brawl, like it doesn't always work, right? And this just works, and this feels like it replaces some of the stuff they lost in Uldurar Valley with Shield Shatter. This is kind of even better in some ways, like not as affordable, but just bigger. It hits a wider variety of boards. So I think this is a really natural fit for Control Warrior, kind of perfect for what they're trying to do. I think the Forge aspect is fine and sort of works as a hero power plus anyway, and then sets up for this awesome card. So all in all, I think Sanitize looks very, very good for slower Warrior decks, like A+ removal. All right, so finally for Warrior here, we've got the Battle Worn Faceless, a 2-mana 2/2 Battlecry transform into a copy of a damaged minion. And this looks absolutely nuts for Enrage Warrior, a deck that's actually been pretty good for a while. It's just really sleepy. In other words, people don't play it much, but it's been competitive. I don't know why people don't like it much. Even through all the Warrior is bad memes, Enrage Warrior was still kind of trooping along there. It's a good deck. But the Battleworn Faceless, I think, looks perfect for it, basically. Obviously, that deck already cares about damaged stuff. That's what Enrage Warrior is all about. And in particular, with cards like Anima Extractor buffing your hand, you know, you can get some awesome big crazy buffed stuff in hand. Maybe even, you know, a Grom Hellscream. You use maybe a location or whatever it is to buff and activate your Grom and damage it, and then use Battleworn Faceless to copy your Grom for some crazy damage output. And that might kind of be best case scenario, high roll scenario. But, you know, it doesn't have to be nuts. Just good stuff on board in the mid game. If you have, like, you know, a 5/4 that's like damaged on board, and you have an imbued axe equipped, play a Battleworn Faceless sometimes just to get an extra damage minion hit with the axe. Like, that's gonna feel good just to have extra awesome minions on board. Now, I will say, given that Anima Extractor example, there's a little bit of a counter synergy there where this is going to be in hand absorbing buffs from an Anima Extractor, and then it's going to transform anyway, so we'll kind of lose any of those buffs it absorbed from the Extractor. Now, theoretically, of course, you're going to be copying something very often that was also buffed by the Extractor, so you might be getting a lot of those buffs back. Sometimes you'll benefit more, sometimes you'll benefit less, but there's only one card in hand. I don't think that's too big of a problem for an Anima Extractor sort of deck. I think ultimately the upside for this, just making something big and crazy, and sometimes making something with charge, like a Crazed Wretch or a Grom, probably just makes this really, really good for Enrage Warrior decks. It's not necessarily great from behind, but it kind of is, because you could use it on enemy minions too, keep in mind. So it does not have to be allied stuff. It's just a damaged minion, which makes it even better than the old Bloodsworn Mercenary, a card that lived in a similar space and was really, really good. I think even got nerfed for a while there. But unlike Bloodsworn Mercenary, which I'm trying to pull up here real fast if you remember this one, unlike this can be used on an enemy minion as well. So actually even good when you don't have the right targets in hand. Sometimes you might be able to copy something big and awesome from your opponent. So all in all, this card just looks really strong to me. All right, so moving on over to Rogue here. We have a couple mech cards and a tentacle card. Kicking it off with the Tiny World Breaker. This is a new 4-mana 4/4 mech Battlecry. If you control another mech, deal 4 damage. And man, I just don't think Mech Rogue is going to need a card like this. That deck wants to go really fast, start stacking stats really early. They want to have a ton of mana flexibility. And I just don't think Tiny Worldbreaker fits into that game plan. Like, it's not sneaky enough. It's not magnetic in any way or connected to magnetic cards. And by the time they want to be spending 4 mana on stuff, I think they just have bigger and better options. But also just need more mana flexibility, I think. So there is like a small angle of this giving them a little bit of like over the top reach, which can sometimes be a struggle for that deck. But even then, like Voltron can give you over the top. Well, Voltron can give you over the top reach, but I'm talking Mimron is what I mean to say. Mimron also has ways to give you that kind of over the top damage as well. So Tiny Worldbreaker wouldn't even really fill in a gap there. And if it did fill in that gap, I still think it would be far too clunky and awkward to play elsewhere. So this just doesn't really line up with the way Mech Rogue plays the game. You know, this is just not a card they want to slot in at 4 mana. They want magnetic plays, big crazy stats, silly, crazy, you know, sneaky sort of stuff. And this is just a little bit too honest and straightforward. 4 mana 4/4 that deals 4, even if it didn't have conditionality, would be, I think, okay. I don't think that's great in Hearthstone these days. Cards are just so crazy strong. So this just seems to miss the mark from both a power level direction maybe for Mech Rogue and a direction. In other words, the sort of like play style of the deck I don't think lines up very well with this. So we've also got here Assembly Line, a new 1 mana spell. Discover a mech from another class. I'm a little bit more intrigued here by Assembly Line. I mean, Discover is of course really useful, and you might be able to find some cool mechs that do better line up with the Mech Rogue game plan. I am a bit worried that you may find some that don't, like you just get 3 choices that don't really help you all that much. But I like the idea of being able to find some bigger late game mechs if you kind of stall out or need, you know, a second wind of sorts. There can be some big useful sort of stuff in other classes, and surprising the opponent can also have some value as well. So, you know, I think at a base level, a lot of the Mech Rogue lists will feel sort of settled enough that they don't really need this. You know, they'll have a game plan, they'll want that like consistency, and something like Assembly Line won't feel necessary because they know what they're doing and they're going to stick to that plan. But I could imagine some fun lists just running this, and you know, the occasional slightly more kind of greedy list running this as well, because you want to find, like, you know, I'm trying to pull up some mechs while I'm talking, sorry. You want to find like a Gaia the Tectonic or something, you know, it's like, oh man, that's a spicy hit in other classes. So in other words, one of those cards we see occasionally near the bottom of the list, like we talked about before. Probably not a core inclusion in most Mech Rogue decks, especially for people who are super sweaty and trying to win a lot. People maybe angled a little more towards fun, make an excuse to run this. And also some Thief deck implications as well. Thief deck is Thief Rogue is something we don't really see right now in the meta, but this is another card to keep in the back pocket for that. I actually think the fact that it's a mech in that case might be a bit of a limiter for Assembly Line. You may get things that are kind of specific in their use cases if you're not running a pure mech deck, like, oh, I got magnetic but no real stuff to magnetize to. So maybe not the best fit in a Thief deck either, but still, you might just need a critical mass of those sorts of cards. And then finally here for Rogue, we have their Tentacle card. This is Tentacle Grip, a 2 mana spell. It deals 3 damage at a base, and combo get a 1/1 Chaotic Tendril. So I will say this is maybe the best feeling of the base versions of these cards. A lot of times they've felt like just awkwardly expensive or lowly statted. The Tentacle Grip, I mean, hey, 2 mana deal 3, it still kind of holds up these days in Hearthstone. Sometimes you just want to ship stuff to the face, especially as a rogue. So I think that gives this a little more play and more opportunity than a lot of the Tentacle cards we've seen so far. I'm still not totally sure the Tendrils are going to be worth it or good. It still seems far too slow in its impact and inconsistent in its impact, especially just because you might need to run a bunch of these to make them ever feel like great plays. And even if you do get this up to a random 6-cost spell, sometimes I think it's still going to backfire and whiff, as we've said, is the problem. Now that said, Rogue might be able to benefit from this a little bit more. Things like Shadow Steps, but also just combo activators. Having cheap cards in hand can sometimes be really useful to Rogue to do cool stuff. So I am definitely higher on the Tentacle Grip here than most of the Tentacle cards we've seen so far. I think this one has at least a chance to get played, whereas most of the others have felt pretty bad. I'm still kind of waiting on Yogg-Saron, though. We've been teased that Yogg-Saron is incoming as a Titan. So is Yogg going to connect to these tendrils in some way, fuel these up, enable these, scale off these? That might give all of these cards a bit more chance, but this one is at least poised to take more advantage than most. General Vezax is a 4-star card. Battle-Worn Faceless is a 5-star card. Sanitize is a 4-star card. Tiny Worldbreaker is a 2-star card. Tentacle Grip is a 3-star card. Assembly Line is a 3-star card. And there you go. That's it for another Titans mini set review. What do you guys think about these cards? Is General Vezax going to be absolutely crazy or just solid, like I think? Just kind of maybe good, like I think. Curious to hear those thoughts and more down in the comments below. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.